It was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday. Nothing special. Work had dragged on like it always did, emails piling up, phone calls draining what little patience I had left. By the time I finally wrapped up, all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and settle into some peace and quiet. That was the plan. Simple, predictable, but life has a way of throwing punches when you least expect them. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed in my pocket. At first, I ignored it, figuring it was just another useless notification. Maybe a weather alert, maybe some junk mail. Nothing that couldn't wait. But then, as I slid into the driver's seat, I pulled my phone out, glancing at the screen out of habit. A message from my neighbor, Greg. Are you aware that your wife sits in the gazebo for hours with a young gardener? I stared at the text. Read it once. Twice. A strange sensation crept over me, slow and insidious. The kind that starts in the pit of your stomach and spreads like ink in water. My fingers tightened around the phone as my brain scrambled for an explanation. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe Greg was just being nosy. He was the kind of guy who noticed things, always peeking over fences, making little comments about the neighborhood. But why would he send this? What was he implying? I exhaled through my nose, staring at the words again, as if they might shift and rearrange themselves into something less damning. The young gardener. I knew exactly who he meant. Evan. He had started working for us a few months back. Laura had been the one to hire him, insisting we needed someone young and energetic to maintain the garden properly. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. The kid was maybe in his early 20s, all tan skin and easy smiles, the kind of guy women noticed whether they wanted to or not. But Laura was just being Laura, right? She loved the garden. She was always out there, pruning her roses, checking on the vegetables. She had a habit of talking to anyone who would listen, neighbors, delivery drivers, grocery clerks. So why did this feel different? I locked my phone and set it down on the passenger seat, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles pale. My heartbeat was steady, but my mind was already working through every possible scenario, every rational explanation. Except there was one problem. I had never trusted blind coincidence. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my muscles were tense, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. I killed the engine, sitting there for a moment, staring through the windshield. The house looked the same as always, quiet, welcoming, familiar. Nothing about it suggested that something might be wrong. But Greg's words still echoed in my head. I got out of the car, slamming the door a little harder than necessary, and took a deep breath of the evening air. The scent of freshly cut grass lingered, mixing with the faint floral notes drifting in from the backyard. And then I saw them. From where I stood, the gazebo was partially hidden by the thick vines and flowers that Laura had carefully cultivated over the years. It sat at the far end of the yard, nestled between the towering oak trees, a quiet little retreat that she had always adored. She wasn't alone. Even from a distance, I could see her sitting there, legs crossed, body angled toward him. The way she leaned in slightly, the way her hair fell over one shoulder as she laughed at something he said. It wasn't the kind of laugh you gave a stranger. It wasn't the kind of laugh you gave a gardener either. Evan stood close, too close. His posture was relaxed, casual, like he had all the time in the world. He leaned against one of the gazebo's wooden beams, arms folded across his chest, his entire demeanor screaming familiarity. My pulse pounded in my ears. Greg hadn't been lying. I watched them, standing there in the growing shadows of the evening, feeling something dark coil deep inside me. I didn't call out, didn't move. I just stood there, fists clenched, my mind running wild with the implications. Laura had always been good at making people feel comfortable. She had a warmth about her, an easy charm that made her the kind of woman people gravitated toward. But I knew my wife. I knew when she was simply being friendly. And this wasn't friendly. She reached out at one point, playfully swatting at his arm as she laughed again, and something inside me snapped into place. It was subtle, just a small movement, but it told me everything I needed to know. The kind of woman who idly touched another man, who sat in a secluded spot giggling like a schoolgirl, wasn't just passing the time. She was enjoying herself. She was comfortable, too comfortable, and I hated it. I had come home expecting a quiet evening, a normal night. Instead, I had walked straight into something else, something ugly, something I hadn't seen coming. My blood ran hot. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt, but I didn't charge forward. Not yet, because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood there for a long moment, unmoving, staring at the scene before me. The world around me faded. The chirping of crickets, the faint rustling of leaves in the evening breeze, even the distant hum of a car passing down the street. Everything blurred into the background. The only thing that mattered was what I was seeing. Laura and the gardener, sitting together in the gazebo, laughing, talking, too close, too damn comfortable. The longer I watched, the tighter my grip became, my fingernails biting into my palms. The anger that had been simmering inside me since Greg's message was starting to boil over, dark and ugly. I had always prided myself on being a patient man, a rational man. I didn't jump to conclusions, didn't let paranoia get the best of me. But this wasn't paranoia. This was real, and I could feel the betrayal sinking into my bones. I took a slow step forward, then another. My footsteps were quiet on the grass, swallowed by the thick summer air. They hadn't noticed me yet. Laura was too busy twirling a strand of her hair around her finger, too busy flashing a smile at him, the kind of smile she used to give me. It was almost insulting how at ease she was. She didn't even think to look over her shoulder. Did she assume I was still at work? That I was too oblivious, too trusting to notice? Or worse, did she not care? I clenched my jaw so hard I could feel the pressure building in my skull. My vision tunneled on them, on the way she leaned in slightly when he spoke, on the way he met her gaze without a hint of hesitation. Then, for just a second, I hesitated, not because I doubted what I was seeing, but because I was deciding how to react. I could storm over there right now, demand answers, make a scene. I could knock that smug expression off Evan's face with one good punch. Watch the realization dawn in Laura's eyes as she realized she'd been caught. Or I could wait. Let this play out. Let them expose themselves completely before I made my move. A deep breath filled my lungs, my fists tightening at my sides. I had always believed that when a man discovered the truth, he had two choices: react like a fool or respond like a man who knows. A man who sees. And right now, I was seeing more than enough. I shifted my weight slightly, making just enough noise for the gravel under my shoes to crunch. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to break the spell they had settled into. Laura's head jerked up first. Her body stiffened, eyes going wide as she caught sight of me standing there. For the briefest moment, I saw something flicker across her face, something that almost looked like guilt. But just as quickly as it appeared, she buried it beneath a carefully practiced expression. Surprise. Innocence. Like she wasn't doing a damn thing wrong. Evan turned a second later, slower, lazier. His eyes met mine, and I saw the faintest trace of hesitation in his posture. Like an animal sensing danger. Good. He should feel it. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, closing the distance between us with slow, deliberate steps. Laura was the first to speak. "Honey, you're home early." Her voice was smooth, controlled. Like she was making a casual observation, like nothing about this situation was remotely unusual. Like she hadn't just been sitting in a secluded corner of our property with another man, looking at him like she used to look at me. I said nothing. My silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the gears turning in her head, the way she was already shifting into damage control mode. I had seen her talk her way out of things before: late-night shopping sprees, forgotten appointments, overspending on things we didn't need. But this wasn't some impulsive decision she could excuse away. She cleared her throat, shifting slightly in her seat. You were just what? My voice came out low, steady, deadly calm. Laura faltered for a fraction of a second, barely perceptible. I was just chatting with Evan. About the garden. I exhaled slowly through my nose, my fists curling at my sides. The garden. Yes. She nodded quickly, too quickly. You know how much work it takes. We were just discussing the fall plans, what needs to be pruned, what should be planted next season. Evan said nothing. Smart kid. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him to make sure he felt the weight of my stare. That true. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Yes, sir. Just work talk. I almost laughed at how stupid they thought I was. But I wasn't laughing. I looked back at Laura, at the way she was gripping the edge of the table, like she was preparing herself for an argument she wasn't sure how to win. That's funny, I said, my voice flat, because Greg seems to think this has been going on for hours. And not just today. I watched the color drain from her face. Just for a second. Then, like the practiced liar she was, she pulled herself together. Greg? Oh, come on, you know how he is. He's always making something out of nothing. You're seriously going to listen to him? My jaw twitched. She was scrambling, trying to shift the blame, to make me question what I had seen with my own eyes. But I wasn't the kind of man who ignored the obvious. And the obvious was sitting right in front of me, looking guilty as sin. I leaned forward slightly, planting my hands on the table between us. You know what I think, Laura? She licked her lips, eyes darting toward Evan for half a second before snapping back to me. I think you should start telling the truth. A tense silence settled between us, thick with unsaid words and ugly realizations. Laura opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was calculating, weighing her options, but I had already made up my mind. I wasn't waiting for an explanation. I wasn't here to be lied to. I had seen enough, and this was far from over. I stood there, hands pressed against the wooden table in the gazebo, staring my wife down. The air between us was thick, suffocating. I could hear the faint rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets in the distance, but all of it faded into the background. Laura sat still, her eyes locked onto mine, her lips slightly parted like she wanted to say something, but didn't quite know what. She had always been good with words, always knew how to turn a situation in her favor. But not this time. Not now. Not when I had seen it with my own damn eyes. She had been sitting here for who knows how long, laughing, smiling, touching the arm of a younger man like it was the most natural thing in the world. She hadn't noticed me standing there, hadn't even thought to check, because she hadn't expected to get caught. I straightened up slowly, rolling my shoulders as I turned my gaze toward Evan. The kid was still standing there, looking uncomfortable but not nearly as panicked as he should have been. That pissed me off even more. Get out, I said, my voice low, controlled. Evan blinked. Sir, I wasn't asking. A muscle in my jaw twitched as I took a step forward. My patience had its limits, and I was right on the edge of them. He hesitated for a second too long. Big mistake. I clenched my fists, stepping even closer, forcing him to make a decision. His confidence wavered, his posture stiffening. He wasn't stupid. He could see the warning in my expression. Without another word, he gave Laura a quick glance, like he was waiting for some kind of signal, some reassurance that she'd smooth things over. But she said nothing. She wasn't going to save him, and he finally realized it. He swallowed hard, turned on his heel, and walked away. Fast. I waited until I heard the sound of the gate clicking shut behind him before I turned back to my wife. Laura was watching me carefully now, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were turning white. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, finally breaking the silence. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. You're unbelievable. She shook her head. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I stared at her, stunned at how easily she could sit there and act like I was the problem, like I was imagining things. I exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down my face as I stepped back. How stupid do you think I am? Laura's expression flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. It was the look of a woman who knew she had run out of excuses but wasn't ready to admit it. She took a breath, setting her shoulders. Greg doesn't know what he's talking about. I scoffed. This isn't about Greg. This is about you, sitting out here for hours with another man, giggling like a damn schoolgirl. What the hell do you think that looks like? Laura rolled her eyes, leaning back in her seat. It looks like two people having a conversation. My jaw tightened. Even now, even with the evidence staring her in the face, she refused to admit it. You touch him while you talk, too? I asked, voice like steel. Laura's lips parted, but she hesitated. That pause told me everything. I nodded slowly, running my tongue over my teeth. Yeah, that's what I thought. Her shoulders rose and fell in a frustrated sigh. You're making this into something it's not. Am I? I shot back. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I took a slow step around the table, my eyes never leaving hers. Tell me something, Laura. If I spent my evenings sitting in some secluded corner of our backyard with a young woman, whispering, laughing, making her feel special, would you be okay with that? She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. She had no answer, because we both knew damn well she wouldn't tolerate it. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. Yeah, didn't think so. Laura shifted in her seat, crossing her arms. You're being ridiculous. No, I said firmly. I'm being clear. She scoffed, looking away. You don't trust me. I let out another dry laugh, shaking my head. Trust? After this? Are you out of your damn mind? She flinched at that, but I didn't care. I had always given her the benefit of the doubt. Always let little things slide, dismissed any nagging thoughts as paranoia. But this was different. She had been sitting out here with another man, fully aware of how it looked, fully aware of what she was doing. And she hadn't cared. Not until she got caught. Laura finally met my eyes again, but this time there was something else in her gaze. Not guilt, not regret, defiance. That was when it hit me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. She was just annoyed that she had to deal with the fallout. My stomach twisted at the realization. I had been married to this woman for years, built a life with her. And now, standing here, staring at her across the gazebo, I didn't even recognize her. You know what, Laura? My voice was quiet now, eerily calm. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. I held her gaze, unflinching. I don't think I even like you anymore. For the first time, something in her expression cracked. It was subtle, just a flicker, but I saw it. I turned on my heel and walked away, not waiting for a response. I didn't need one, because this was far from over, and she damn well knew it. I walked away from the gazebo, from my wife, from the nauseating sight of her sitting there like nothing had happened. But the fury inside me didn't cool. If anything, it burned hotter. The grass crunched beneath my shoes as I crossed the yard, my breaths coming slow and measured, though my chest felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. My hands twitched at my sides, itching to break something. Anything. I stepped onto the back porch, gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white. The house in front of me looked the same as it always had. The wide windows, the soft glow of the lights inside, the porch swing that Laura had insisted on, even though neither of us ever sat in it. It was all just normal, like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong, and it had been for longer than I wanted to admit. I inhaled through my nose, exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. Behind me, I could hear Laura moving. I could feel her hesitation, the weight of her stare on my back. She was debating whether to follow me, whether to keep playing her game. I didn't turn around. I just walked into the house, letting the screen door slam shut behind me. I wasn't in the mood for a conversation. Not when I was seconds away from saying something that would destroy whatever was left of this marriage. I made my way into the kitchen, yanking open the fridge and grabbing the first thing I saw, a beer. I twisted the cap off and took a long pull, the cold liquid doing nothing to soothe the fire inside me. Footsteps, soft at first, then more confident. I didn't have to turn around and know it was her. Laura stepped into the kitchen like she owned the place. Like she hadn't just been caught flirting with the damn gardener in our backyard. She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms over her chest. So that's it. I took another sip of beer. What's it? She huffed, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. You're just going to ignore me now. I let out a humorless laugh, finally turning to face her. Ignore you? No, Laura. I think I've been ignoring enough as it is. Her eyes narrowed. Meaning what? I set the bottle down on the counter, tilting my head. Meaning I've been a goddamn idiot. That's what. Meaning I've let things slide when I shouldn't have. Meaning I should have seen this coming a long time ago. She blinked. Seen what coming? I clenched my jaw. Don't do that. Do what? Don't play down, Laura. It's insulting. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she hesitated. And that hesitation? That told me everything I needed to know. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Tell me something. If Greg hadn't sent that text, would you have told me? She licked her lips, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. Would you have told me, I repeated, slower this time, that you've been spending hours out there with Evan? That you've been smiling at him like you used to smile at me? That you've been touching his damn arm like. It's not like that, she snapped. I barked out a laugh. Then tell me, Laura, what's it like? She opened her mouth, then shut it. Exactly. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You know what the worst part is? She didn't answer. I took another step forward, forcing her to look at me. I believed in you. In us. No matter what, I always thought. I cut myself off, jaw tightening. Because what was the point? She didn't deserve to hear it. Laura sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You're making this bigger than it is. And just like that, whatever was left of my patience snapped. Bigger than it is? I repeated, voice dropping to something colder. Laura, I just walked in on you acting like some lovesick teenager with a man half my age, and I'm the one overreacting? Her nostrils flared. I wasn't acting like anything. Bullshit. She exhaled sharply. You're twisting this. No, I cut in, voice firm. I'm seeing this. Maybe for the first damn time. Laura stepped forward, her frustration bleeding into something else. Look, I like talking to him, okay? Is that a crime now? I stared at her, and there it was. Not an apology, not a denial, just that. She liked talking to him. I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a bitter chuckle. Wow. Laura's expression hardened. You're acting like I cheated on you. I snapped my gaze back to hers. Did you? She flinched. And that, right there, was all the answer I needed. She hadn't expected me to ask that outright. She thought she could keep control of this conversation, keep feeding me half-truths and justifications. But I wasn't playing her game. I took a slow, measured step closer. You hesitated. Laura swallowed. That's not. You hesitated. I repeated, my voice like steel. She shook her head quickly, her hands balling into fists at her sides. I didn't do anything. I arched a brow. Nothing? Not one thing. She exhaled through her nose. Not physically. Physically. I repeated with a humorless laugh. Right? Because emotional betrayal doesn't count, huh? Because sitting out there with him, making him feel special, giving him all the attention I should be getting, that doesn't mean anything. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. I let my words settle, let her feel them. Then I shook my head, grabbing my beer and turning away. I'm done talking, I muttered. Laura stepped forward quickly. Wait, no. I spun back around, my voice sharp. You had plenty of time to be honest with me, and you weren't. So now, I laughed dryly. Now I don't give a damn what you have to say. Her face twisted, like she wanted to fight back, but knew she couldn't. Not anymore. I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen, each step feeling heavier than the last. This wasn't just an argument. This wasn't just some stupid misunderstanding. This was the beginning of the end. And Laura? She damn well knew it. I walked down the hallway with heavy, deliberate steps, each footfall echoing in my ears. The house around me felt colder now, emptier, like the walls themselves had shifted. I had lived here for years, built a life within these walls, filled them with memories, laughter, moments that were supposed to mean something. But now it just felt like a place where lies had been whispered, where stolen glances had been exchanged, where I had been made a fool without even knowing it. I reached the bedroom, pushing the door open without thinking. The familiar scent of Laura's perfume lingered in the air, clinging to the sheets, to the furniture, to everything. It used to be comforting. Now it made my stomach turn. I stood there, staring at our bed, at the perfectly arranged pillows, the neatly folded blankets. Had she ever laid here at night, thinking about him? Had she closed her eyes and pictured his hands instead of mine? Had she whispered his name in the dark, even just in her mind? My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. I hated this. Hated the way doubt poisoned everything. The worst part, I didn't even know how long it had been going on. How many nights had I been sitting in the living room, watching TV, while she was out there in the gazebo with him? How many times had I kissed her goodbye in the morning, completely unaware that she was spending her afternoons smiling at another man? Greg's text had been the first sign. But how many had I missed before that? A soft creak sounded from behind me. I turned, already knowing who it was. Laura stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of forced calm. She was always good at that, controlling her expression, choosing her words carefully. But I could see it now. The small details. the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped her forearm just a little too tightly. She wasn't as in control as she wanted to be. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, voice quieter now, less defensive. I let out a slow, humorless chuckle, shaking my head. "Doing what, Laura? A little late to play innocent, don't you think?" She sighed, stepping into the room. "I don't want to fight." I scoffed, running a hand through my hair. "You don't want to fight? You should have thought about that before you spent your afternoons playing house in the damn gazebo." Laura rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. "Jesus, you're acting like I slept with him." I stared at her for a long moment, studying her, weighing the weight of her words. Then I asked the question I already knew she wouldn't answer honestly. "Did you?" Her lips parted slightly, her body going unnaturally still. The hesitation was brief, so brief that most people wouldn't have caught it. But I wasn't most people. I had lived with this woman for years. I knew when she was lying. Her breath hitched for just a fraction of a second before she schooled her face into indifference. "Of course not. Of course not." The words felt hollow, meaningless. I didn't respond. I just let the silence stretch between us, let her feel it. Laura shifted, her fingers twitching at her sides. "You don't believe me." I let out a slow, steady breath. "No, Laura, I don't." She flinched, just slightly, but enough for me to catch it. I shook my head. "Do you?" She blinked. "What? Do you believe yourself?" I asked, voice quiet but firm. "When you say you didn't do anything, do you actually believe it? Or are you just hoping I'll be stupid enough to?" Her mouth opened, then closed. And that right there? That was the answer. I let out a dry chuckle, stepping away from the bed. "You know what the funny thing is? I wanted to believe you. Even after seeing you out there with him, even after Greg's message, even after everything, some part of me still wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt." Laura swallowed hard. "Then why don't you?" I met her gaze. "Because you don't deserve it." The words landed like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. Laura's posture stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "So that's it? You're just going to assume the worst?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Assume?" "Laura, you hesitated. You couldn't even answer me without thinking about how to spin it. That tells me everything I need to know." Her nostrils flared. "You want me to say something that isn't true just to satisfy you?" I stepped forward, my voice dropping. "I want you to tell me the truth." She didn't. She couldn't. Because we both knew the truth would burn whatever was left of this marriage to the ground. And maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my jaw. "You know what, Laura? I'm tired." Her brows pulled together. "What?" "I'm tired," I repeated, voice quieter now, heavier. "So damn tired of this. Of the games, the excuses, the half-truths. I don't have the energy to fight for something that's already dead." Her breath caught slightly, and for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. Fear. Not fear of losing me, no. Fear of losing the life she had built. Fear of consequences. But she wasn't scared enough to be honest. She wasn't scared enough to stop. And that was all I needed to know. I nodded slowly, my decision settling in my bones. "You've made your choice, Laura," I said, voice steady. She frowned. "What does that mean?" I grabbed my phone off the dresser, my movements slow, deliberate. "It means I'm done." Her breath hitched. "You don't mean?" "I do." I cut in, my voice firm. "This, us, whatever the hell this marriage was supposed to be, it's over." Panic flickered across her face, but I was already walking past her, heading for the door. "Wait," she called after me. "Can we talk about this?" I didn't stop. I didn't turn around, because we were past talking. We were past fixing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter, because I wasn't carrying the weight of her lies anymore. She could keep them. I was walking away, and I wasn't looking back. I stepped out of the bedroom, leaving Laura standing there in the doorway, her voice trailing behind me like an echo of a life I no longer recognized. Wait, I didn't stop. Not for her. Not for explanations. Not for one more empty excuse or carefully crafted lie. I made my way down the hallway, my footsteps steady, my mind surprisingly clear. Maybe I had expected this moment to feel heavier, to crush me under the weight of what was happening. But instead, I felt lighter, like a man finally setting down a burden he'd been carrying for far too long. I reached the living room, grabbed my keys from the table, and without a second thought, walked straight out the front door. The evening air hit me like a slap. Cool, crisp, full of the sounds of a neighborhood winding down for the night. Porch lights flickered on. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. And behind me, the door creaked open. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Laura. Her voice followed me down the steps. "You just leaving?" Just like that. I kept walking. "Where are you even going?" I didn't answer, because it didn't matter. Anywhere was better than here. I climbed into my truck, the leather seat warm from sitting in the sun all day. I shoved the key into the ignition, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Laura was still standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her silhouette framed by the porch light, waiting, expecting me to come back, expecting me to cool off, to storm out in anger, but return later like I always had. Because that's how it worked, right? I would be furious. She would spin her story, and somehow, some way, she would make it seem reasonable. Not this time. I started the truck. The engine rumbled to life, a sound that somehow felt more final than any argument we could have had. Laura took a step forward. "Don't do this." I let out a slow breath, gripping the wheel harder. "You did this," I muttered under my breath. Then I pulled out of the driveway, the road to nowhere. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. Streetlights blurred past. My phone buzzed once, then again. I knew without looking that it was Laura. I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in hearing whatever last-minute story she was crafting. I turned onto the highway, my hand steady on the wheel, my mind finally quiet. Because there was no fixing this, no salvaging it. It was over. I had spent years believing in something that had been crumbling right in front of me. I had ignored the small signs, dismissed the doubts, convinced myself that Laura was still mine. But she hadn't been mine for a long time, had she? Maybe it had started small. A conversation here, a flirtation there. Maybe she had told herself it was harmless. And maybe at some point, she had stopped caring if it was or not. I gritted my teeth, forcing my grip on the wheel to loosen. The anger was still there, hot and coiled, but beneath it was something else. Something colder. A realization that I wasn't just angry at Laura. I was done with Laura. A stop I didn't expect to make. I wasn't sure how long I drove before I ended up outside a familiar house. Greg's house. The neighbor who had sent me that text. The one that had set this whole thing in motion. His lights were still on. I sat there for a moment, drumming my fingers against the wheel, debating whether or not I should even be here. Then, before I could think better of it, I threw the truck in a park and climbed out. Greg opened the door before I even reached the porch, like he had been expecting me. He stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Figure I might see you tonight," he said. I let out a humorless chuckle. "That obvious, huh?" Greg shrugged. "You got the look of a man who just had his world flipped upside down." I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah, something like that." He nodded, stepping aside. "Come on in. Got beer in the fridge." I hesitated for half a second before stepping inside. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the first night of something new. Something that didn't include Laura. And that was just fine by me. Greg's house was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped inside, taking in the dimly lit living room, the faint hum of an old ceiling fan overhead, the smell of cheap air freshener trying to cover up the scent of whatever takeout he'd eaten for dinner. It was a far cry from my house. Our house, but at least it didn't feel like a goddamn crime scene. Greg walked into the kitchen without a word, pulling 2 beers from the fridge and popping the caps off with a flick of his wrist. He handed me one, then sat down on the couch, kicking his feet up like we weren't about to have a conversation that would change everything for me. I took a long swig before finally speaking. "How long?" Greg didn't pretend not to know what I meant. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face before answering. "Couple months, maybe more." I nodded slowly, rolling the bottle between my fingers. Months. It wasn't a shock. Not really. The truth had been hanging there for hours now, waiting to land. But hearing it confirmed, that did something to me. Greg studied me carefully. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. Figure maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But then it kept happening. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. So everyone knew but me. Not everyone, he said. Just me. And maybe the damn dog walker. He mentioned seeing her out there with him a couple times too. I huffed out a humorless laugh. Jesus. Greg took a sip of his beer, watching me carefully. You think it ever got physical? I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't know. And the worst part? I didn't care. Not anymore. What difference did it make? Maybe she had slept with him. Maybe she hadn't. Either way, I had seen enough. I leaned back against the couch, letting my head rest against the cushion. Does it matter? Greg didn't push. He just nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. And he did. He had been married once, too. He had learned the hard way that the worst betrayals weren't the ones that happened behind closed doors. They were the ones that started small, the little lies, the stolen moments, the secrets they never thought you'd catch on to. I was in your shoes once, he said after a long silence. I turned my head to look at him. Yeah. He nodded. Wife ran around on me for months before I figured it out. Thought I could fix it. Thought it was just a phase, a mistake, something I could forgive. I arched a brow. Did you? His lips pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Hell no. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh in another life. Greg leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're better off without her, man. You don't see it now, but you will. One day, you'll wake up and realize she did you a favor. I nodded, staring down at the label on my beer bottle. I wasn't there yet. Not even close. But maybe, just maybe I would be. The last goodbye. I didn't stay long. After another beer, a few more words, and a silence that said more than anything else could, I got up and left. The drive home was different this time. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been before. The fire had burned out, leaving nothing but cold embers. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house felt like a stranger. A place I used to know. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the front door. Then, slowly, I climbed out of the truck. The porch light was still on. Laura was waiting. She stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. You came back, she said softly. I nodded once. Not for you. Her throat bobbed. Can we talk? I let out a slow breath. No, Laura. We're past that. She stepped forward, reaching for me, but I took a step back. And that was the moment she realized it was really over. Her eyes filled with something, regret, maybe, or just fear. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't her husband anymore. Not really. I was just a man she used to know. I walked past her, into the house that wasn't mine anymore, and grabbed the one thing I'd come back for, my suitcase. Then I left. And this time, I wasn't looking back.